Welcome to the Fantasy Premier Podcast. I'm Paul, and I am on vacation here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in the United States, wonderful wilderness country, and I just got back to civilization, so I'm going ahead and catching up on all things Formula One, and there's a lot to catch up on. So if it sounds like I'm whispering, it's because I am. The family's sleeping in the other room, and the hound dog's sleeping right down there. But no, this is wonderful. So lots to talk about after the British Grand Prix, and I'm not going to dive into too much of the lap by lap tactics with it. At least now, Ben and I will discuss all that next week when we're both back in the studio. But weather was a huge factor with this. Pit stop strategy was a huge factor, and so was a lot of mechanical issues. So George Russell should have, in quotes, won. I went heavy into Mercedes for this week and heavy specifically into George Russell. And then he has a mechanical issue and DNFs. And that's not typical. That's not normal. He's racing very strong. Mercedes is doing really well. And it's just one of those things that happens. So we definitely shouldn't divest in George Russell. Ferrari isn't doing so hot right now. They had an upgrade package again. I get all this from the F1.com. They had an upgrade package. I guess didn't pan out, and you just have to look at the fantasy numbers and look at the performance and where they're finishing to see that much. And so again, I went pretty strong into Ferrari. I went strong into Carlos Sainz, which didn't do too bad. He ended up bringing in 28 points, which is good. And Ferrari ended up bringing in 35 points for the weekend, which again isn't bad. The issue with Ferrari bringing in 35 points is they cost $23 million when Haas brings in 30 points and they cost $10 million. And that's one of the strategies, one of the tactics I am going to go into concerning the fantasy aspect of it. McLaren didn't have all that bang up of a race. They should have finished 1-2. Again, Oscar Piastri was doing really well. Then the rain came, and it was a strategy call. And I'm not going to sit here and Monday morning quarterback all the strategy. There's plenty of people who are a lot smarter than me when it comes to F1 strategy who can do that. I just look at the fantasy results and call it according to that. And it didn't work out for McLaren. They should have done a lot better. They had the capability of doing a lot better, and they agree. Like, they're the ones who are saying, and I'm just parroting it, that it wasn't quite their race. Lando Norris, again, doing really, really well. He had 26 points, and I'm clicking as I'm going through this. So Lando Norris, he had 26 points. Max Verstappen had 29. So Max Verstappen got a lot more points from starting a little bit lower and passing more people than Lando Norris did, which is good. The issue is that Max Verstappen had to pass more people. Let me go back to qualifying. Max Verstappen qualified fourth, and baby's awake. Maybe I should keep my voice down. Okay, we'll see. We'll see if baby cries again. But the issue with Red Bull right now, and a lot of people think that I'm a Max Verstappen hater. I'm not. I promise. The thing I don't like about Red Bull this year isn't their performance, isn't them as a team, isn't Max Verstappen or Sergio Perez. The issue I take with them is their price tag. They've been so dominant over the last several years that in the fantasy F1 world they bring a premium, and rightfully they should. As soon as they weren't so expensive, you'd have what went on last year, where everybody has Max Verstappen, everyone has Red Bull, and your F1 season is decided based on everybody else and how they're doing. So that's what they try to get out of by having them be so high priced. The problem is now is that as soon as you want Max Verstappen, he brings in 29 points. Got it. That's good. But he costs $31 million. So there's a 30-year budget gone to get 29 points when you could have gotten Lando Norris for, a few points less, but save you a substantial amount of your budget. So again, what's going on with Max Verstappen is that he is back with the rest of the pack. The issue isn't that he's not the GOAT. Got it. GOAT who is doing really well, who rightfully deserves it right now, is Lewis Hamilton. Why? Because yes, Max Verstappen was doing well and he was passing everybody. He passed Lando Norris and he passed Oscar Piastri, and arguably because of pit stops they were doing rough. But Lewis Hamilton got it right. Lewis Hamilton, who's a 7-time winner, he won. So I promise I'm not sitting here hating on anybody. But from a fantasy aspect, Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes, they are doing really, really well. They cost roughly a quarter to a third less than Red Bull does. So you have to be looking at them for your fantasy teams. If not, you're just leaving points on the table. So with this week, then, the counter to what I just said is that Russell had a really bad week. So as soon as Russell had just, not DNF'd, as soon as he had maybe lost a couple positions, he wouldn't have had the -20. And then in the United Kingdom, instead of Mercedes pulling in 38 points, they could have gotten 48 or 58, and they could have done a lot better points-wise and had that number reflect the price we pay. Because right now, if Ferrari in the UK had 35 points, like I said, and the Mercedes had 38 points, well, you can save yourself $13 million and get 30 points with Haas. And why is that? So, first off, Haas is doing better this year, but also because of a lot of the bonuses you get with, and we're back. Baby woke up, had to get her passy back to her. So, where was I? Haas. Okay. So, I understand. So, there's a lot of points available to teams that aren't necessarily available to the drivers. And this is really important, especially if you're relatively new to the fantasy F1 world. So with qualifying position, if you get both drivers into Q3, you get 10 points. If you get one driver into Q3, you get 5 points. If you have the fastest pit stop, you get 10 points. If you have the second fastest pit stop, you get 5 points. If you get the third fastest pit stop, you get 3 points. There's a lot of points available to a constructor. And it's designed, rightfully so, to go ahead and make sure the constructors stay more competitive, right? And so you're not just doubling up on your driver's points, which is good. So you have with Haas in the UK, they had one driver for qualifying position, they got 5 points. One driver got into Q3, and they got 5 points for that. So right there, a third of Haas's points came from team bonuses. With Ferrari last week, one driver got into Q3, 5 points, and they had the fastest lap, which was 10 points. So right there, of the 35 points Ferrari got, 15 of them were just bonuses they get for how well their drivers did. And why is that important? Well, it shows that for those 15, 20 points, as long as your constructors getting into Q3, those 15, 20 points are there, as long as they can have good pit stops. If they have like a superior pit stop, that 15, 20 points are there. And there's a lot of those points are mutually exclusive. So as soon as you have teams like Ferrari and Mercedes that are neck and neck with each other, as soon as one team gets those points, the other team won't, especially when it comes to the fast pit stops and the fastest laps and things like that. Both drivers getting into Q3, you need to have both drivers get into Q3 because you get the 10 points for it. And so a lot of the metric we need to be using is not who's doing best in the race. It's who's qualifying into Q3 and who's finishing in the top 10, because that's where the points are. And as soon as you have Haas, that's at least having one driver get into Q3 and both drivers getting into the top 10, you have to look at that. That has to be something to play with, because they only cost $10 million right now, and they're growing up by $5 million a week. So as soon as like with one of my teams, I have McLaren and Haas, but then because I have Haas, I was able to get Oscar Piastri on my team. Didn't quite pan out this week, but you have Oscar Piastri and McLaren, and then Pierre Gasly, which again, Pierre Gasly had been doing great. Then he takes damage in lap 1 and gets a DNF. But the previous weeks, he got 12 points, 7 points, 14 points, 2 points, 1 points, 15 points, 13 points, 5 points, 5 points, another DNF in Saudi, and 6 points in Bahrain. So he'd been doing really well. Can't really count that. But the point still stands that Mercedes and Ferrari are going neck and neck. Who's better? Well, they're taking points from each other, so they're driving both of their values overall down. And right now, with Mercedes doing well, Ferrari, until Leclerc can figure out what's going on, and until they can, get their car back to where they want to be, because, again, this is a guy from Julian Palmer, like watchf1.com, but if they Ferrari brought a bunch of upgrades a few weeks back, and it didn't quite pan out, so they had to revert back to the way they were. I think it was in Barcelona in Spain. So that's 3 weeks of progression. They didn't get 3 races, I should say, of progression. They don't have, but Mercedes does, and McLaren does. So right now I'm divesting from Ferrari and putting that money towards better drivers, especially as a constructor, right? Any given day, one of the Ferrari drivers can do well, but your strength, like I said, from your constructor is having both drivers do well and both get into Q2 and both get into Q3 and both finishing in the top 10. Then your bonuses for your constructors go up. And right now, Ferrari is getting pretty much as many bonuses as Haas. Maybe not quite, but from a fantasy perspective, for your points money, you can save 60% of your money by getting Haas and still get 70% of the points, and then put that money towards other people. The last thing I want to talk about, one of the last things I want to talk about, is Red Bull. I know I already touched it earlier before I went to go hang out with Baby for a few, but Red Bull is so overpriced coming into the season, and they had to be because of last year. Last year, if you played the fantasy team and played Fantasy F1, Red Bull Constructor and Max Verstappen, you had to have them. Boom. So everybody was getting the same amount of points. A lot of the strategy was removed, and it ended up, I know for me in my personal league, it came down to how you managed your money throughout the course of the year, and then who had what second and third tier drivers for the last couple races. And that's what prevented me from winning my private league, like my friend's league. Somebody else went with Ferrari. I went with a different person, and they ended up passing me, and I didn't have the money to invest in Ferrari. And it came down to like joke on you or something like that as to how well he did or something like that. So in order to avoid that, they went ahead and had Red Bull be very expensive. So as soon as you have Red Bull, you can only have Red Bull, and you have to make sacrifices elsewhere. The issue with it is that this year, Max Verstappen, he's doing well, but points-wise in fantasy, he got 29 last week, 25 the week before, 38 in Spain, 37 in Canada, and 13 in Monaco. Okay, that's not bad. Let's look at Charles Leclerc. 2, 16, 18, DNF, 45, 24. Okay, so he's doing better than Charles Leclerc. Let's look at Lando Norris. 26, 13, 51, 40, 19. So without sitting here and doing the math, Max Verstappen cost 31 million. And let's look at Carlos Sainz. 28, 28, 16, DNF, like I talked about, 23, 17, then 26 in the United States. Max Verstappen is doing better than everybody except Lando Norris. Absolutely. But he's not doing that much better. So as soon as you go from Carlos Sainz to Max Verstappen, you're paying an extra 10% of your overall budget. You're paying $10 million. You're paying the value of the Haas constructor just to get Max Verstappen. And yes, Max Verstappen has 120 points more than Carlos Sainz. And if we look at the constructor, for Red Bull Racing has 817 points, and Mercedes has 545 points, and Ferrari has 687. Got it. Yeah, on paper, Red Bull's doing great. We should keep them as a constructor. However, if you look in the last, back to Monaco, the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 races, UK 55, 56 in Australia, 82 in Spain, 25 in Canada, 8 in Monaco. So again, really quick math, 1, 2, in the last 5 races, they've only had 200 points. A little bit over 200, called 210. In the last 5 races, they've had 210 points. In the first 3 races, they had more than that. In Japan and China, they brought in 230 in just those 2 races. So Red Bull's lead right now is because of previous success, not current performance. And because of that, a lot of that's coming down to the fact that the field's going faster and that Sergio Perez, great driver, doing really well, but he was beaten by Haas. Sergio Perez was beaten by Haas. That's not editorialism. That's just editorializing. That's just truth. Does it mean that Red Bull is a worse constructor than Haas? Not at all. Does it mean that Sergio Perez is a worse driver than Magnussen or Hülkenberg? No, not at all. All it means is that right now the points aren't ticking towards Red Bull. The points are ticking towards Haas, and Red Bull is coming down into the pack where you have Ferrari, you have Mercedes, and you have McLaren, and now you have Red Bull, and they're all taking points from each other. There's no longer the one dominant team. It's all stratifying out. So any one given week, it's, your team, your big constructor will get 60, your medium constructor will get 30 to 40. And over the course of 3 weeks, and they'll switch places so much that over the course of a few weeks, man, it's just not the clean decision that it was in years past and in weeks past. So right now, the strategy seems to be McLaren and Mercedes, or double up on your good drivers, get McLaren and get Haas as your constructor and as drivers, because Nico Hülkenberg got it. They had a really bad week a few weeks ago, right? They got a double DNF in Monaco. But in the UK, they did Nico Hülkenberg. I'm not going to go back to the historical. Let's just look at the last few races here, right? Haas, Hülkenberg beat out Lance Stroll, beat out Fernando Alonso, beat out Alex Albon, Yuki Tsunoda, Logan Sargent. All right? Like Nico Hülkenberg was right behind Carlos Sainz. And also Charles Leclerc, finished 14th because he had a rough time. Okay, so that's Hülkenberg. Where was the other Haas? Kevin Magnussen finished 20. Okay, that's about where we expect them to be. But Hülkenberg did really, really well. And so we have to not say that, that's, divest of everybody for a Haas is the next new thing. That's not what we're doing. But we have to, at least as fantasy players, we have to look at it. Because guess where Hülkenberg was in Austria? He was P6 finishing in Austria. Where was he in Spain? Okay, Spain, Hülkenberg was back in a P11. So it's a 2-race streak for him being in the top 10. We have to acknowledge that, because if we don't, and he stays on the streak for the next couple races, we're going to miss out on points overall. So that is the quick discussion from Great Britain. The important takeaways: don't worry about Russell getting a DNF. That's just a mechanical thing. That's like Max Verstappen's brake fire. It happened. Russell was qualifying really well. He was on pace really well. Oscar Piastri, McLaren, still go with them. They're still really strong. It didn't work out because of just the rain, and they took a gamble that didn't pay off. Ferrari, I'm seriously getting rid of Ferrari for right now until they figure it out, until they start scoring multiple, start doing better. And I know you're like, but they got 35 points, they got 69 points the week before and 44 points in Spain. Yeah, they're not doing bad, but with Mercedes doing better, like they had in Austria, they had 76 and they had 66 in Spain, they had 74 in Canada. Mercedes is just doing better. So if you could pick for Ferrari or pick Mercedes, go with Mercedes right now until Ferrari figures it out. And if you're looking for a way to save points, get Haas on your team, get Haas's drivers, and you can put that extra money towards, like in my second team, I did it towards Oscar Piastri. And again, didn't quite work out as well as I'd hoped. But yeah. And one last thing. So there's 2.3 million teams in the global league. So when you go to your league page and you click on your public league and you click on your starter league, if you want to see how well you're doing overall, don't necessarily worry about your points, because, there's like, as soon as Max Verstappen's, 2 minutes ahead of everybody else, you can't really look at timing. But when you look at your global league, look at your ranking, and every 23,000 is 1%. So as soon as you are 23,000 or less, you're in the top 1% of the world. 46,000 or less, 2%. 6,000 or less, or 69,000 or less, you're in the top 3%. So that is a quick way for you to look at your global ranking and see how you're doing. And as soon as you're in the top 10% is great. Top 3% is wonderful. It's very tough to get into the top 1%. I have one team in the top 1%, and then two in the top, one in the top three, one in the top one in the top two, one in the top three. And I'm struggling to keep everybody in the top two. That is my goal. But man, this last week, just Russell getting that DNF, that is just rough. And 40 points right now. So one of my teams has 2,310 points. And the next one up has 2,350 points. So a 40-point difference, 40-point difference is 11,000 ranking positions. So 40 points advances you 11,000 positions. So don't get too down on yourself. If you're like me and over the last couple of races you've gone for a strategy that ended up being suboptimal, it's fine. We're halfway through the season, still a lot of season left, and this is where it really happens, because soon here in the next 5 or 6 races, upgrades are going to stop coming for the teams that are pretty solid in where they're at. Like unless they're going to start unless they're going to really jump positions and they're going to make more and they're going to make a lot of advancements, they're going to start to pull money from current upgrades and start putting them towards next year to try and start next year better. So be on the lookout for the talk, and we'll be sure to mention it here if people are stopped bringing upgrades. That's not happening yet, but as soon as like Ferrari were to say, okay, we're done bringing upgrades, then you shouldn't have them on their fantasy team anymore. As soon as McLaren or Mercedes stops bringing upgrades, then you need to start putting your money elsewhere, because the rest of the team is going to pass them. But we'll talk all about that later. I hope you had fun. Hope you enjoyed this. I hope it helped. And anyway, we'll be back in the studio next week. We'll hear what Ben has to say, and I'll talk to you more then. Cheers.